How's it going? Since it's Halloween, I guess I have to talk about a scary game, even though I just did, but whatever. Now 4 years ago I made a video on Outlast, basically tearing into the game. It's really underwhelming, and I'd even say it's overrated. I found the story to be alright, but I hated the gameplay loop, and I thought the horror got really old really quick. Looking back, I may have been a bit harsh on this game, but I'm still not the biggest fan of Outlast. Of all the popular horror games I've played, this one left the least impact. But today, I'm revisiting the series with the follow-up, Outlast 2. Like its predecessor, this game was fairly well received, a bit lower than the first one, but most people do seem to like this game. So today, I'm going to see is Outlast 2 better, scarier, or just as overrated as the first one? Well, that was definitely Outlast 2. Let's talk about the story first. While it's set in the same universe, Outlast 2 is completely different from the first game. You play as Blake, who's a cameraman for his wife Lynn. They go to investigate the origins of a murder victim before, oh wow, shocker, the helicopter crashed. Now stuck in the dreaded state of Arizona, Blake is briefly separated from Lynn, but eventually finds her escaping from cult leader Noth, the main antagonist. But they're immediately attacked by a group called the Heretics, and then Blake runs through a village, and then he runs through a forest, and then he runs through a cave, and then he walks into a Diddy party, and then his wife gives birth to the Antichrist, and then the world blows up. The end. Okay. It feels like absolutely nothing happens between the beginning and the end. The only cutscenes you get in between are these flashback sections from when Blake was in school. Oh, fuck, it's Christian. He's gonna get molested, isn't he? Thankfully, it's just about his childhood friend being murdered. And I was interested in the lead up to this reveal, wondering if this has an underlying connection to Blake's current situation, but it doesn't. I don't know why this was included. The only relation this has to the main part of the narrative is the Christian theme, and we're already shown how people can abuse religion to control others and commit awful crimes. I don't need to be told a second time. This filler pissed me off because this time could have been spent focusing on a character like Noth. Supposedly the main antagonist, we see him in 2 cutscenes throughout the entire game. The first one being when he's torturing a heretic, and the second one being at the end of the game where he kills himself. What the fuck? How do you have less screen time than Father Martin? He barely contributes to this story other than the fact that he has a bunch of lunatic villagers chasing after you, and every other character is just as forgettable. You spend little to no time with any of them. Like, who is this? Genuinely. What is her name? I can't find her wiki. Red Barrels have said this game is heavily inspired by the Jonestown Massacre, but it doesn't delve deep into this topic at all. There's huge potential for an amazing story here, but what we get is a very surface level narrative about a crazy cult. But this game isn't all about the story. We have the gameplay as well. You have a couple of new mechanics added, like this one to listen through walls and peeking around corners, but I think they're a bit underutilized. I didn't bother turning on the audio mechanic because if you're wearing headphones, you can hear enemies nearby anyway. As per usual, you have to sneak around without getting caught, using stealth techniques like crouching in tall grass or hiding in a barrel. Unlike last time, you often have to get around multiple enemies. Now on paper, this sounds great. It builds on the stealth from the first game, and having to worry about more than one enemy makes these scenarios scarier, until you realize that it's easier to just run past everyone. Even with having to manage your stamina, you can simply sprint past every enemy and get what you need. The areas are way too open, so it's easier to go undetected even when you're completely exposed. So what should be an integral part of the gameplay is practically redundant when you can save time and resources by doing this instead, and also a complete immersion breaker. That's fairly bad game design. Now the difficulty is one of Outlast 2's biggest criticisms, and while I didn't find the game impossible, I was dying quite a lot. Not because I was stuck on a certain part, but because this game requires a lot of trial and error. This game isn't very clear on what you're meant to do or where to go, so there's moments where I'm running around like an idiot, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. Especially in the school sections, every time the tongue monster was pursuing me, I kept dying because I had no idea where I was meant to go. Like, how was I meant to know that I have to hide in the stall and then crawl out underneath to progress? And only God knows what I'm meant to do when these arrows are being fired at me. I crouch behind the rocks, I get hit, I sprint, I get hit. There is no clear way to avoid this. As well as that, certain enemies can kill you in one hit, so if your timing is not precise, you might as well give up. One hit is fucking ridiculous though. It doesn't allow for any errors and makes those encounters frustrating instead of fearsome. Along with that, the linearity makes exploration way too simple. You're usually going down a straight path to advance, which is a sharp contrast to the first game where it felt like you were going through a maze to move forward. Oh Jesus almighty, I'm actually giving credit to the first game. And once again, the puzzles are completely brain dead. Move the car backwards, then change the tracks, then move it forward, Puzzle done. Oh, well done, so difficult. I'm not gonna complain too much because I just played Silent Hill 2, but it wouldn't hurt to make me use my head a little bit more. Overall, I feel like the gameplay's worse here. It's not as formulaic as the first one, as they tried to switch it up with the inclusion of the cornfields and the raft, but the linearity of the maps, the amount of guessing games, and the ability to simply bypass enemies makes Outlast 2 a lot less enjoyable. But what about the horror? Have they added new ways to scare the player without relying on jump scares, chase sequences, and gore?
No.
Seriously, can this team not do any other kind of horror? Like, yeah, once again, I was scared at the start, you know, the old lady jumping at me, I shat myself. But when they're throwing them at you every 5 steps you take, it loses all of its value. There's no build-up of tension whatsoever, it's just jump scare, fuck off, like. Same thing with the chase sequences, you know, a little spooky the first time, but by the 20th chase, I was ready to break my neck. Just like the first game, it's the same thing over and over, and I feel bad for whoever made the soundtrack. The score is really good at amplifying the horror, but it barely makes an impact because the game is too predictable. I think the gore is just a personal thing though. For some players it's really unsettling. I look at it and just shrug my shoulders. When it's plastered everywhere, it doesn't really do the job for me. But yeah, the horror is really poor once again. My heart rate is usually through the roof when I play these types of games, but as much as I want to be scared by this game, I can't when I know exactly what's gonna happen. And lastly, I feel like this game lacks a clear identity. Like, yeah, it's Outlast 2, it says it right there, but it's so different compared to its predecessor. The first game was a survival horror that focused on an asylum that had patients being experimented on by a big bad corporation. But Outlast 2 focuses on cult horror and the atrocities that these people commit, convincing themselves and everyone around them that it's an act of God. There is zero connection between these entries, and if I played this game without knowing its title, I would not think it's the sequel to Outlast. The gameplay is the only bit of correlation that these games have. Now, I did a little research and there is a mention of Murkoff in Outlast 2, but you really have to go out your way to find this. And looking at the plot for the Outlast trials, that game goes back to being about Murkoff, which just makes Outlast 2 stick out like a sore thumb in this series. Instead of building upon the overarching story, it goes down a completely different path that disrupts the flow of the franchise's identity. And I wonder, what is the plan for Outlast in the future? Will they stick to the Murkoff narrative? Will they have more Diddy parties? Or will they venture down a new path like they did in Outlast 2? There doesn't seem to be a clear theme yet, so only God knows what Red Bowls are planning for Outlast 3. But enough waffle about the future. Right now, Outlast is not good. The story could have been so good, and I was looking forward to what was going to happen, especially with the flashbacks hinting at something deeper, but it abandons this mystery, offering no payoff and leaving me feeling completely let down. The gameplay tries to build upon the foundations of the first game, but falls flat on its face with linear design, unclear objectives, and an easy method to skip what should be difficult scenarios. The horror... I'm not talking about it anymore. And its lack of identity adds up to a game that I don't ever want to play again. I think this series just isn't for me if I'm enjoying the sequel even less than I did with the first game. Maybe for some people, a certified freakazoid is exactly what they need for a horror game, but for me, it doesn't do the job. I give Outlast 2 a 3. Thanks for watching. Have I completely missed the point of Outlast 2, or do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments below. I want to thank you for the support on my last video as well. It completely smashed any expectations I had, and I really appreciate it. I will do my absolute best not to abandon this channel again and try to remain consistent, but until then, subscribe.